Buenas tardes, muchas gracias a todos por estar con nosotros en esta lectura maratónica. Thank you everybody for coming to this literary reading, it's a marathon reading, celebrating the day of the book. And as every year, this is the 8th, and we are celebrating the literature of the Caribbean. Las historias y poemas que hoy vamos a leer sugieren las posibilidades y las complejidades que representan el descubrimiento del Caribe, pero no un Caribe singular, sino un Caribe plural. No un Caribe cerrado, sino un Caribe abierto e indudablemente un Caribe sin fronteras. Vamos a empezar con un poco de literatura en criol haitiano. Luego vamos a continuar con unos cuentos, primero Jamaica, después Cuba, y pues yo creo que eso va a ser nuestra participación hasta ahora. Entonces, antes de empezar con la lectura en criol, unas palabras de Rafael Osuba, nuestro anfitrión siempre en esta actividad de Yo Soy Quijote. Adelante.
Gracias, Luis. Primeramente, para mí es un orgullo de estar aquí con ustedes este año de nuevo y de nuevo colaborar con Duke University. Le quiero dar las gracias a mi gran amigo Luis Navarro y a Miguel Rojas Sotelo y a Jack Pierre que nos están colaborando este año con la lectura maratónica. Hoy concluye nuestra maratónica que empezamos el martes en Methodist University con nuestro gran amigo Javier Pavón. También estuvimos en Meredith College con nuestro amigo de Jonathan Wade. Ayer estuvimos en Charlotte con nuestros amigos allá, Liliana Windrow y Rafael Prieto, con el Día del Idioma. Y hoy concluimos aquí en Duke University leyendo en voz latina y criolla y caribeña, más que todo. I want to just take a few moments to say thank you to Duke University and to my good friend Luis Navarro and Jacques Pierre and Miguel Rojas Sotelo for our 8th annual literary marathon. We conclude that today. We celebrate this week-long marathon in commemoration of the day of the book, which we will end our festival, our 7-month-long festival, on Sunday, the 23rd, when we commemorate the death of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, who is the reason, the purpose, the catalyst that why we do our festival. Now in our 8th year, we also commemorate the death of another great writer, William Shakespeare. I want to once again invite you to learn a little bit more about our festival. You can visit us at imquijote.com. And after this event, officially our festival is concluded, but we've extended it for another 2 events we have coming up. Our event, free concert that we're doing once again with Duke at the Durham Park, and that'll be June the 2nd. And then we end with a International Children's Day, which is a great festival, free festival that we'll be doing in downtown Raleigh with the Core Museum on June the 3rd. Everyone's invited. So without further ado, we want to hear from Haiti and in the words of Creole. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jacques Pierre. I'm very happy to be here today. Aujourd'hui, c'est un plaisir pour nous gagner Amalia Désir et Michael Larue qui participent dans le festival littéraire.
Today, it is a pleasure to have Amalia Desir and Michael Larue to participate in this literary festival.
Deux étudiants yo a représenté section langue créole haïtienne qui chita dans le département langue romane.
These two students represent the sections of the language of Creole, which sits in the Department of the Romance Languages.
Poème yo pral yo chita dans une anthologie bilingue créole-français qui était publiée dans l'année 1999 sous direction Jean-Claude Bajou.
These poems that we're going to read are from the bilingual Anthology of Creole and French that were published in the year 1999 under the direction of Jean-Claude Bajou.
The first poem I'm going to read is called Page écrite. Page écrite. Wap kampe nan maj la. Wap jwe nan rev moyo. Page par page. Nap fe l'amour. Sous papier katouye. Ote se Lionel Trio. The author is Lionel Trio.
Poem appelé Rele Ziel, which means eyes. Yo pap kan soleil, ak zel papillon, mes yeux chéri, zio tonne, zio qui ton couillon papillon, tout coulé sous bobèche soleil. And the author is Georges Castelrier-Fils. C'était première fois, moi t'es espantant, c'est cette dernière fois, moi marre zel moi.
Nan jipon la lin, tout piti me chantait. Ainsi, fond, la vie te répédalait, jour pour jour. And the author is Rodney St. Eloi.
Merci.
Ok, entonces seguimos ahora con un cuento de Olive Senior de Jamaica. Se llama Jueves Soleados. Olive nació en Trelawney, en Jamaica, en 1941. Es poeta y cuentista y sus publicaciones incluyen textos sobre la historia social y cultural. El cuento Jueves Soleados explora el tema de la alienación y es un comentario sobre los miedos imperceptibles vinculados con las preocupaciones de raza y color en la sociedad jamaicana. Esta historia explora asuntos de la identidad caribeña en términos de género y etnicidad.
Bright Thursdays by Oliver Senior. Thursday was the worst day. While she had no expectations of any other day of the week, every Thursday turned out to be either very good or very bad, and she had no way of knowing in advance which one it would be. Sometimes there'd be so many bad Thursdays in a row that she wanted to write home to her mother. Please, please take me home, for I cannot stand the clouds. But when she remembered her mother saying, Laura, this is a new life for you. This is opportunity. Don't let your mama down, children. Swallow your tongue before you talk, lest you say the wrong thing, and don't make you eyes ache for everything you see. Don't give Miss Christie no cause for complaint, and most of all, let them know you have brought up seed. Miss Christie was the lady she now lived with, her father's mother. She didn't know her father except for a photograph of him on Miss Christie's bureau, where he was almost lost in a forest of photographs of all of her children and grandchildren. All brown skin with straight hair and confident smiles on their faces. When she saw these photographs, she understood why Miss Christie couldn't put hers there. Every week she dusted the burrow. Laura looked at herself in the mirror and tried to smile with the confidence of those in the photographs. But all she saw was a being so strange, so far removed from all those in the pictures, that she knew that she could never be like them. To smile at a camera, one had to be born to certain things. A big house with heavy mahogany furniture and many rooms. Fixed meal times, a mother and father who were married to each other and lived together in the same house, would chastise and praise, who would send you to school with the proper clothes so you would be like everyone else, fit neatly into the space life had created for you.
But even though others kept pushing her and she tried to ease to work her way into that space too, she sometimes felt that life had played her tricks. And there was, after all, no space allotted for her. For how else could she explain this discomfort, this pain it caused in her father's house to confront even the slightest event, such as sitting at the table and eating a meal. In her mother's house, she simply came in from school or wherever and sat on the stool in the corner of the lean to the kitchen or the steps while Mama dished up a plate of food, which one ate with whatever implement happened to be handy. Mama herself would often not stand to eat, sometimes out of the pot, and the boys too would sit wherever their fancy took them. Everything would be black from the soup from the fireside, which hung now like grotesque, torn ribbons from the roof. After the meal, Laura would wash the plates and pots in an enamel basin outside and sweep out the ashes from the fireside. A meal was something as natural as breathing. But here in this house of her father's parents, a meal was a ritual, something for which you prepared yourself by washing your hands and combing your hair and straightening your hair before approaching the table. The table was in the dining room, and at least 12 could have comfortably sat around it. Now Laura and her grandparents huddled together at one end, and in the somber shadows of the room, Laura sometimes imagined that they so unbalanced the table that it would come toppling home over them. At other times, she polished the mahogany. She placed each of the children of the household at the place around this table, along with their mother and father, and their be-whiskered and be-ribboned grandparents who looked down from oval frames when they were all seated. They fitted in so neatly in their slots that there was no place left for her. Sometimes she didn't mind. But now, at the real meal times, the ghosts were no longer there, and she sat with the old people in the empty, echoing space. Each time she sat down with a dread for her heart, for mealtime was not time to eat so much as time for lessons in table manners.
First, Mary the cook would tinkle a little silver bell that would summon them to the dining room, and the house would stir with soft footsteps, stirring like mice and the swish of water in the basin. All the inhabitants of the house were washing and combing and straightening themselves in preparation for the meal. She tried not to be the last one to the table, for that was an occasion for chastisement. Then she had to remember to take the stiffly starched white napkin from a silver ring and place it in her lap. Now sit up straight, child. Don't slump so. Miss Christie was said as she lifted the covers off the tureens. Miss Christie sat at the table, uncovering dishes of food, but by the time Laura was served, her throat was already full, and she had got confused that she would forget the knife and start to eat with her fork. Now, dear, please use your knife. And don't cut your meat into little pieces all at once. At the sulky look which came over Laura's face, Miss Christie would say, "You'll thank me for this one day, you know, Laura. If you are going to get anywhere, you must learn how to do things properly. I just can't imagine what your mother has been doing with you this time. How a child your age can be ignorant of the most elementary things is beyond me." The first time Miss Christie had mentioned her mother in this way, Laura had burst into tears and fled from the room. But now, remembering her mother's words, she refused to cry. Laura's father had never married her mother. The question never came up for said Myrtle, without even a hint of malice in her voice. Miss Bertram was a young man of high estate, very high estate. She was fond of telling this to everyone who came to her house and did not know the story of Laura's father. How Mr. Bertram had come visiting the Willers where Myrtle was a young servant. They had what she liked to call a romance, but which was hardly even imprinted on Mr. Bertram's mind. And Laura was the result. The fact that Mr. Bertram was a man of high estate had in himself elevated Miss Myrtle so far in her own eyes that no one else could understand how she could have managed to bear her sons afterwards was two undoubtedly humble fathers.
Laura had come out with dark skin with almost straight hair, which Miss Myrtle did her best to improve by rubbing it with coconut oil and brushing it every day, at the same time rubbing cocoa butter into her skin to keep it soft and make it clear. Miss Myrtle made the child wear a broad straw hat to keep the sun from shining that her skin was too delicate. Miss Myrtle had no regrets about her encounter with Mr. Bertram, even though his only acknowledgement of the birth was a $10 note to Sid at the time. But then he had been shipped off to the United States by his angry parents, and nothing further had been heard from him. Miss Myrtle was uncomfortable in her choice of fathers for her children, for none of them gave her any support. She single-handedly raised them in a little house on her family land and took ensuing to augment what she got from her cultivation of food for the pot and ginger from the market. She did not worry about the fate of her sons. They were after all boys and were able to fend for themselves when the time came. But her daughter was a constant source of concerns to her. For a child with such loving curly hair, with such a straight nose, with such soft skin, was surely destined to a life of ease and comfort. For years, Miss Myrtle sustained herself with the fantasy that one day Laura's father would miraculously appear and take her off to live up to the station in life to which she was born. In the meantime, she groomed her daughter for the role she felt she would play in life, squeezing things here and there in order to have enough to make her pretty clothes so that she was the best dressed little girl for miles around. For the time being, it was the only gift of heritage that she could make her. Then after so many years passed that it was apparent to even Myrtle that Mr. Bertram had no intention of helping the child, she screwed up her courage, aided and abetted by the entire village it seemed, and wrote to Mr. Bertram's parents. She knew them well, for Mr. Bertram's mother was Miss Willow's sister and in fact came from a family that had roots in the area.
Dear Miss Christie, greetings to you in Jesus' holy name. I trust this letter will find that you and Mr. Dolphy are enjoying the best of health. Well, Miss Christie, I write you this letter in fear and trembling, for I am the little one, and you are the big one. But I hope you will not take me too forward, but Mr. Bertram. Little girl, now 9 years old, and bright as a button. Well, my dear mom wished you could see her, a good little girl, and learn her lesson well. She would go far in life if she could have some help. But I am a poor woman with nothing to help. I am in the fields morning till night. I can tell you that in looks she take after her father, but I am not asking Mr. Bertram for anything. And no, he have his life to live, but if you can find it, your power to do anything for the little girl, God richest blessing will come down on you. May the God Lord bless and keep you, Miss Christie, also Master Dolphy, and give you a long life until you find eternal rest, safe in the arms of the Savior. Your humble servant, Myrtle Johnston. The letter caused consternation when it was received by the old people, for they have almost forgotten about what the family referred to as Bertram's mistake. And they thought that the woman had forgotten about it too. Although Myrtle was only 17 at the time, and their son was 28, they had never forgotten what Miss Christie called the uppity black gal for seducing their son. Dying to raise their color, all of them. Miss Christie had cried, dying to raise their color. That's why you can't be too careful with them. Now, like a ghost suddenly materializing, they could see this old scandal coming back to haunt them. At first, the two old people were angry. Then, as they talked about the subject for days on end, they soon dismissed their first decision, which was to ignore the letter, for the little girl, no matter how common and scheming her mother was nevertheless family, and something would have to be done about her. Eventually, they decided on limited help, enough to salve their consciences, but not too much, so that Myrtle would get the idea that they were a limitless source of wealth. Miss Christie composed the first of her brief and cool letters to the child's mother.
Dear Myrtle, In response to your call for help, we are sending a little money for the child, also a partial, which should soon arrive. But please do not think that we can do this all the time, as we ourselves are finding it hard to make ends meet. Besides, people who have children should worry about how they're going to support them before they have them. Yours truly, Mrs. C. Watson. They made, of course, no reference to the child's father, who was now married and living in New Jersey. Myrtle was overjoyed to get the letter and the parcel, for they were tangible indications that the child's family would indeed rescue her from a life of poverty in the mountains. Now she devoted even more care and attention to the little girl, taking pains to remind her of the fineness of her hair, the straightness of her nose, and the high estate of her father. While she allowed the child to continue to help with the chores around the house, she was no longer sent on errands. When all of the other children were busy mending goats, fetching water or firewood, all those chores in her household now fell on Laura's brothers. Myrtle was busy grooming Laura for a loving future. Because of her mother's strictures, the child soon felt alienated from others. If she played with other children, her mother warned her not to get her clothes too dirty, not to get too burnt in the sun, not to talk so broad. Instead of making her filled with pride as her mother intended, these attentions made the child supremely conscious of being different from the children around her, and she soon became withdrawn and lacking in spontaneity. Myrtle approved of the child's new quietness as a sign of quality in her. She sent a flood of letters to Miss Christie, although the answers she got were meager and few. She kept her constantly informed on the child's progress in school, of her abilities to read so well, and occasionally made the child write a few sentences in the letter to her grandmother to show off her fine handwriting. Finally, on Christmas, to flesh out the image of the child she had been building up over the years, she took most of the rat-cut coffee money and took the child to the nearest town to have her photograph taken in a professional studio.
It was a posed, stilted photograph in a style that went out of fashion 30 years before. The child was dressed in a frilly white dress trimmed with ribbons, much too long for her age. She wore long white nylon socks and white T-strap shoes. Her hair was done in perfect drop curls with a part to the side and two front curls caught up with a large white bow. In the photograph, she stood quite straight with her feet together and her right hand stiffly bent to touch an artificial rose in a vase on a rattan table beside her. She did not smile. Her grandparents, who were the recipients of a large framed print on matte paper, saw a dark-skinned child with long, dark hair, a straight nose, and enormous, very serious eyes. Despite the fancy clothes, everything about her had a countrified air, except for the penetrating eyes, which had none of the softness and shyness of country children. Miss Christie was a little embarrassed by this gift and hid the picture in her bureau drawer, for it had none of the gloss of the photos of her children and grandchildren which stood on her bureau. But she could not put the picture away entirely. Something about the child haunted her, and she constantly looked at it to see what in this child was her flesh and blood. The child had her father's weak mouth, it seemed, though the defiant chin and bold eyes undoubtedly came from her mother. Maybe it was the serious, steady, unchildlike gaze that caused Miss Christie sometimes to look at the picture for minutes at a time, as if it mesmerized her. Then she would get a hold of herself again and angrily put the picture back in the drawer. Despite her better judgment, Miss Christie found herself intensely curious about this child, whose mother made her into such a little paragon, and whose eyes gazed out at the world so directly. Soon she broached the subject obliquely to her husband. One evening at dusk, as the two of them sat on the veranda, she said, "Well, just look at the two of us. Look how many children and grandchildren we have, and not one to keep our company. So life's stay. Once your children go to town, country too lonely for them after that. I suppose so, but it really would be nice to have a young person about the house again. They dropped the subject then, but she kept bringing it up from time to time. Finally, she said, as if thinking about it for the first time, "But Dolphy, why don't we get Myrtle's little girl here?" "What? And rake up that old thing again? You must be mad. But nobody has to know who she is. And you don't know how old nega fas. They bound to find out." "Well, they can't prove anything. She doesn't have our name. She bears her mother's name." They argued about it on and off for weeks. Then finally they decided to invite the child to stay for a week or two.
When Laura came, she was overawed by the big house. The patrician old couple were always so clean and sweet-smelling, as if perpetually laundered each day anew by Marie the cook. She fell even more silent, speaking only when spoken to, and then in a low voice that could hardly be heard. Miss Christie was gratified. She was so much lighter than the photograph. Indeed, Myrtle had quarreled with the photographer for just this reason, and although she was exactly like a country mouse, she did fill the house with her presence. Although already Miss Christie was busy planning the child's future, getting her into decent clothes, correcting her speech, erasing her country accent, teaching her table manners, getting her to take a complete bath every day, a fact which was so novel to the child, who became from a place where every one bathed in a bath pan once a week, since the water had to be carried on their heads 1 mile uphill from the spring. In the child, Miss Christie saw a lump of clay which held every promise of being molded into something satisfactory. The same energy was which Miss Christie entered into a good marriage, successfully raised 6 children, and saw that they were good marriages themselves. That impelled her to organize the Mothers' Union and the school board. That energy was now to be expended on this latest product, which relatives in the know referred to as Bertram's stray shot. Although her husband fussed and fumed, he too liked the idea of having a child in the mouse once more, though he thought her a funny little thing who hardly made a sound all day, unlike the boisterous family they had reared. And so, as if in a dream, the child found herself permanently transported from her mother's 2-room house to this mansion of her father's. Of course, her father was never mentioned, and she only knew it was him from the photograph because he had signed it. She gazed often at this photograph, trying to transmute it into a being of flesh and blood from which she had been created, but failed utterly. In fact, she was quite unable to deduce even the smallest facet of her character from the picture. All that she saw was a smiling face that in some indefinable way looked like all the faces in the other photographs. All were bland and sweet. In none of these faces were the lines or frowns or blemishes or marks of ugliness, such as squint eye or broken nose or kinky hair or big ears or broken teeth, which afflicted all the other people she had known. Faced with such perfection, she ceased to look at herself in the mirror.
She had gone to live there during the summer holidays, and Miss Christie took every opportunity to add polish to her protege, whom she introduced to everywhere as "my little adopted." As part of the child's education, Miss Christie taught her to polish the mahogany furniture and bake cakes, to polish silver and clean panes of glass, all objects which had been foreign to the child's former upbringing. The child liked to remain inside the house, which was cool and dark and shaded for outside. With its huge treeless lawn and beyond, the endless pastures frightened her. She had grown up in a part of the mountain cockpits where a gravel road was the only thing that broke the monotony of the humpbacked hills and endless hills everywhere. There were so many hills that for half of the day the trees, their house and yard were damp and dark, and moss grew on the sides of the clay path. It was only at midday, when the sun was directly overhead, that they received light. The houses were perched precariously up the hillsides with slippery paths leading to and from the road. And if anyone bothered to climb to the tops of the hills, all they would see was more mountains. Because it was so hilly, the area seemed constantly to be in a dark blue haze, broken only by the occasional hibiscus or croton and the streams of brightly colored birds dashing through the foliage. They were hemmed in by the mountains on all sides, and Laura liked it, because all her life was spent in a space that was enclosed and finite, protecting her from what dangers she did not even know. And then, from the moment she had journeyed to the railway station some 10 miles away and got on the train and had begun to travel through the endless cane fields, but she had begun to feel afraid. For suddenly the skies had opened up so wide all around her. The sun beat down and there was endlessly noisy clacking of the train wheels. She felt naked and anxious, as if suddenly exposed, and there was nowhere to hide. When she got off the train at the other end, there was no cane fields there, but the land was still flat and open, for this was the rolling pasture land. Her curiosity about the herds of cattle she saw grazing in the shade, the occasional tree, could not diminish the fear she felt at being so exposed. Her father's parents' house was set up on the top of a hill where they could see for miles in all directions. Whenever she went outside, she felt dizzy, for the sky was so wide, it was like being enclosed inside of a huge blue bowl. Summer was cloudless, and the hills were so far away that they were lost in the blue. But then summer came to an end, and it was time for her to go to school. The nearest school was 3 miles away. Her grandmother, deciding this was too far for her to walk, though walking greater distances had meant nothing to her in her former life, had arranged for her to travel to and from the school on a bus which went by at the right time each day. This single fact impressed her most as showing the power and might of her grandmother.
She was glad of the bus, for she did not want to talk or walk along to the school. Now the clear summer days were ending. The clouds had begun to gather in the sky. Fat luminous clouds that traveled in packs, and in this strange and empty country became ugly and winking. It reminded her of the pictures she used to get in Sunday school showing Jesus coming to earth again, floating down on one of those fat white clouds. And because of the Jesus of their church was a man who had come to judge and punish sinners. These pictures only served to remind her that she was a sinner and that the God would one day soon appear out of the sky, flashing fire and brimstones to judge and condemn her. And until he came, the clouds were there to watch her. But who else did they move, change themselves, assume shapes of creatures awesome and frightful? If not to torment her with her unworthiness, sometimes when he stood on the barbecue and looked back at the house outlined against the sky, the house itself seemed to move and she would feel a wave of dizziness as if the whole earth was moving away of course and leaving her there alone in the emptiness. She would run quickly inside and find Miss Christie or Mary or somebody, as long as it was another human being to share the world with. While all day long she would feel a large longing for her mother and brothers and all the people she had known since childhood. She never felt lonely, for if her mother had given her nothing else in taking her out of the one life without granting her placement in the next, she had unwittingly raised her for a life of solitude. Here in the big house, she wandered from room to room and said nothing all day, for now her lips were sealed from shyness. To her newly synthesized ears, her words came out flat and unmusical, and she would look with guilt at the photographs and silently beg pardon for being there. There were no other children around the house, and she was so physically removed from others that she had no chance to meet anyone. Sometimes she would walk down the driveway to talk the tall black gate, hoping some child would pass along and talk so that they could be friends. But whenever anyone happened by, her shyness would cause her to hide behind the stone pillars so they would not see her. And although her grandmother said nothing on the subject, she instinctively knew after a while that she would never in this place find anyone good enough to bring into Miss Christie's house. Although she liked the feeling of importance it gave her to get on and off the bus at the school gate. The only child to do so, most times she watched with envy and other children walking home from school, playing, yelling, and rolling the road. There were no shoes, and she invited them for freedom for her feet, once free like theirs, except for Sundays, were now encased in socks and painted leather shoes handed down from one or the other of the rightful grandchildren who lived in Kingston or New York. Most days the bus was one time. Every morning she would wait by the tall black gate for the bus to arrive. The bus would arrive on time every day, except Thursday. Sometimes on Thursday the bus wouldn't arrive until late evening. She would nevertheless every Thursday go to the gates and wait, knowing in her heart that the bus would not come. Mrs. Christie would sometimes walk out and stand by the gate and look at the road up and down. Sometimes Mr. Dolphin, passing on his way from one pasture to the next, would rein in his horse and would also stand by the gate and look up the road. All three would stand silently. The road swayed wide and in an empty world. The silence hummed like telegraph wires. Her life hung in the air, waiting on a word from Miss Christie. Her chest would begin to swell like a balloon, getting bigger and bigger. The bus isn't coming. You have to walk, Mrs. Christie pronounced with finality. Oh, Miss Christie, just a few minutes more, she begged. It was the only thing she begged for, but she knew that the bus wouldn't come, and now, at this terribly late hour, she would have to walk along the 3 miles to school in a world that was empty for people. She would walk very fast, the dust of the moral road swirling around her ankles, along this lonely road that curved past the graveyard. Above, following every step of the way, the fair clouds sat smuggling and smug in the pale blue sky. She hated them for all they knew about her clumsiness, her awkwardness, the fact that she did not belong in this light and splendid place. They sat there in judgment of her every Thursday, the day before market day, the day of her Armageddon. Thursday, the old bus would sit on the road miles above, packed with higglers and their crocus bags, bankrupts and chickens. The bus would start right enough. Somewhere on the road above, the bus would start in the down hours, full and happy. And then, a few miles after, the bus would gently shudder and like a torn metal bird would ease to a halt with a cough and a sigh and settle down on the road, too tired and worn out to move. It would remain there until evening, the market woman sitting in the shade and finding the files away, with the men importantly gathered around the machine, arguing and cursing until evening, when the earth would cool again and the driver would go slowly. Everything patched up till next Thursday, when healers descended with their crocus, bags, and bankrupts, their laughter and their girls and their calling and their furious energy, which proved too much for the old bus. Then with a sigh, it would again lie still on the road above her every Thursday. Sometimes, though, if she managed to draw long enough, Miss Christie would say, "Heavens, it's 10 o'clock. We can't go to the school again." "Oh, Miss Christie," she would cry silently. "Thank you, thank you." Sometimes, when she didn't go to school, Master Dolphin would let her dig around in his Irish potato patch, collecting the tiny potatoes for herself. Digging potatoes was safe. She would not see the sky, and she would never know when a really big potato would turn out among all the tiny ones. Like catching fish, huh? Miss Dolphin said that she argued, though she didn't know how that was, having never seen the sea. And she would love to.
Dos. Un día recibieron una carta del padre de la niña. Venía de visita con su esposa. Poco después de la alegría inicial que produjo la noticia, los abuelos se dieron cuenta de que a la fuerza iban a surgir dificultades con la niña. Por una razón, no le habían mencionado a su hijo nada sobre ella, dado que se sentían avergonzados de no haberle consultado antes de tomar la decisión de traérsela a su casa. Por otra parte, era un poco extraño escribirle a su casa sobre ese asunto, ya que, por lo que sabían de las mujeres americanas, creían que había muchas posibilidades de que su esposa le leyera las cartas. Su decisión inmediata fue mandar a la niña de regreso a su casa, pero esto también presentaba ciertos problemas, puesto que todavía estaban en el trimestre escolar y no se les ocurría que podían decirle a su madre para justificar este cambio de planes. No podían decirle la verdad, porque incluso para ellos la verdad parecía absurda. Que querían devolver a la niñita porque iba a venir su padre. Por una vez, la señorita Christie no sabía qué hacer. Fue el señor Dolphy quien tomó la voz cantante. Escríbele a él y pregúntale qué hacemos, instruyó a su esposa. Después de todo, es su hija. Si no quiere que esté aquí cuando él venga, entonces puede decirnos lo que deberíamos hacer con ella. Se sorprendieron, pero no demasiado, cuando su hijo les contestó que no deberían hacer nada con la niña, pues sería divertido verla. El señor Dolphy no vio ningún motivo de diversión en la situación y pensó que era propio que su hijo menor hacer un chiste de una cosa seria y sobre todo actuar de manera imprudente e irresponsable. Había albergado la esperanza de que Bertram había sentado la cabeza y llevaría una vida seria. Mucho antes de que le dieran a la niña las noticias sobre la visita de su padre, ella lo sabía, pues sin escuchar intencionadamente sus conversaciones, parecía absorber e intuitivamente entender todo lo que pasaba en la casa. Desde que escuchó las noticias, había cierto gozo en su corazón, pues su madre le había dicho tantas veces que un día este padre misterioso suyo vendría y la reclamaría como propia, que ella había llegado a creérselo. Sabía que vendría y la rescataría de sus temores tan endebles como las nubes y no le proporcionaría otra cosa más que jueves soleados. Pero cuando ella miraba la fotografía de su padre de entre todas las del buró, su cara lucía con esa sonrisa ilegible y sosa, y sus ojos no expresaban nada que le indicara cómo él intentaría demostrar su amor por ella. Un día, la señorita Christie le dijo: Laura, nuestro hijo, el señor Bertram, va a venir de visita. Lo dijo de modo que parecía que la niña y el señor no guardaran ninguna relación. Viene con su esposa. No le hemos visto en tantísimos años. Sí, desde que yo nací, pensó Laura. Bien, Laura, espero que te comportes lo mejor que sepas cuando estén aquí. Sí, señora. Laura no mostró ninguna emoción mientras la señorita Christie continuó hablando del tema. ¿Cómo se comporta uno con su padre?, pensó Laura. No tendría experiencia en ello. Había tan pocos padres entre la gente que ella conocía. La señorita Christie revolvió toda la casa en un frenesí de preparativos para la visita de su hijo. Sin habérselo dicho, Laura entendió que tales preparativos no eran tanto para el hijo como para su esposa Blanca. Estaban bastante en lo cierto, por lo que la señorita Christie le había dicho a Murky. Estas mujeres extranjeras son demasiado descaradas, tú sabes. La mitad de ellas no han salido de ninguna parte, pero creen que todo el mundo en Jamaica es un mono y vive en los árboles. Me alegra mucho que mi hijo la traiga para que pueda ver cómo vivimos. Laura sintió a sus palabras en silencio, pues ¿quién a lo largo y ancho de este mundo podría llevar una vida tan impecable y bien ordenada como la señorita Christie? Laura ansiaba poder hablar con alguien sobre su padre, averiguar cómo era él realmente, pero no quería preguntarle a la señorita Christie. Pensó escribirle en secreto a su madre y contarle que el señor Bertram venía y preguntarle cómo era realmente. Pero era demasiado tímida para hacer nada a espaldas de la señorita Christie, pues la señorita Christie, siendo tan sabedora de todo, iba a averiguarlo a la fuerza. A veces quería preguntarle a Milly, la cocinera, que llevaba trabajando para la familia casi 40 años, pero aunque había alimentado la costumbre de dejarse caer por la espaciosa cocina y sentarse a la mesa durante horas, nunca consiguió reunir el coraje para dirigirse a Milly. Y Milly, una mujer silenciosa y taciturna, nunca le dirigía a ella para nada. Creía, sin embargo, que a Milly le gustaba, pues, con frecuencia, sin medir una palabra, le daba algunas exquisiteces del puchero, o le daba a probar las galletas o el pan con la mermelada de guayaba, a pesar de que sabía que la señorita Crissy no le gustaba que comiera entre horas. Pero aparte de gruñir de vez en cuando mientras hacía sus tareas, Milly no decía nada en absoluto sobre el tema del señor Bertrand, o cualquier otro ser humano. Laura deseaba que Milly le hablara, pues para ella la cocina era el lugar más acogedor de la casa.
Su padre y la esposa llegaron un día mientras ella estaba en la escuela. Cuando llegó a casa, le daba apuro entrar y se quedó por fuera tratando de esconderse detrás de un poste cuando la señorita Christie la vio. «Oh, Laura, ven a conocer a mi hijo», dijo la señorita Christie y le introdujo majestuosamente en la sala. «Mina», dijo dirigiéndose a una mujer de pelo amarillo allí sentada, «esta es Laura, la pequeña adoptada de la que te estaba hablando». Laura al principio distinguió vagamente a la mujer, luego a la Modolfi, luego a un hombre extraño en la sombra, pero era demasiado tímida para dirigirle más que una mirada fugaz. Él no se dirigió a ella, pero sonrió sin apenas mover los labios. Durante los días siguientes se acostumbraría a esa sonrisa, que no era tan sosa como en la fotografía, no prestó más atención a su hija. Era la esposa quien se inquietaba con la pequeña, haciendo preguntas y comentando sobre sus rizos. Laura apenas podía entender lo que la mujer decía, pero le impresionaba lo estilizada y elegante que era, sus vestidos de ilimitada fascinación, sus joyas, su risa, su acento, su perfume, la seguridad en sí misma. Al ver sus largas uñas pintadas, le vino la imagen de las manos de su madre, las uñas desiguales y rotas como las de un hombre, por su trabajo en el campo, la oscura cara de su madre, su tosca voz chillona, y sintió una amarga vergüenza. Conociendo quién era su madre, no era sorprendente, pensó, que su padre no pudiera aceptarla. Le incomodaban exageradamente los invitados en la casa. Su presencia forzaba al máximo las nuevas habilidades sociales de la señorita Christie, que la señorita Christie le había inculcado. Ahora tenía una doble ansiedad: no decepcionar a su madre con respecto a la señorita Christie y no decepcionar a la señorita Christie delante de la mujer blanca de los Estados Unidos de América. A pesar de todas las intenciones de la mujer, era el hombre quien ella quería que le prestase atención, la aceptase, la amase, pero nunca lo hizo. Se las ingeniaba todo el tiempo para estar cerca de él, para sentarse en su ángulo. En su ángulo de visión. Le dio para aparecer por casualidad en la senda cuando él caminaba por los pastizales. El hombre no la veía. A él le encantaba hablar. Su voz sonaba sin tregua, como el suave murmullo de las olas del mar, que ella nunca había visto. La ceniza de su cigarrillo se iba acumulando hasta que se le caía sobre la ropa o sobre el deslumbrante suelo de la señorita Christie, pero nunca habló con ella. Esto le causaba más ansiedad incluso que los esfuerzos de la señorita Christie en pulirla, pues mientras que sentía que la señorita Christie intentaba, por duro que resultara, engrandecería, no podía evitar sentir que la indiferencia de su padre no hacía más que empequeñecerla, anularla. Laura se habría cuestionado si él sabía quién era ella, si no fuera porque sabía que la señorita Christie le había escrito sobre el asunto. Decidió que toda esa indiferencia era parte de una comedia, que él quería sorprenderla cuando la reclamase y que estaba preparando el momento mágico del reconocimiento que después iba a iluminar la vida de los dos por los siglos de los siglos. De esta manera se consolaba durante el día, pero por las noches lloraba. en la habitación donde dormía sola, con la temerosa sombra del árbol de pan que se reflejaba en los cristales de la ventana. Y llegó de nuevo el jueves, y con esta ansiedad incluso se olvidó de su padre, como siempre. El autobús no llegaba y se quedó esperando cerca del portón con la esperanza de que la señorita Christie se olvidara de que estaba allí hasta que fuera demasiado tarde para ir caminando a la escuela. La carretera se perdía blanca y solitaria en la vacía mañana, silenciosa excepto por el zumbido de las abejas y el latir de su propio corazón. Entonces aparecieron la señorita Christie y Mina en el porche y obviamente la vieron. Mientras hablaban empezaron a caminar tranquilamente hacia el portón donde esperaba ella, atrapada por varios impulsos. Los latidos del corazón de Laura, cada vez más rápidos, casi se pararon cuando su padre apareció por el naranjal y se aproximó a las dos mujeres. Ahora los tres caminaban hacia ella. Estaban lo suficientemente cerca para que Laura pudiera oír lo que decían, pero sus ojos estaban clavados solo en su padre. ¡Ay, señor! Ese viejo autobús. Laura va a llegar tarde otra vez, dijo la señorita Christie. Por amor de Dios, ¿por qué no dejas de preocuparte tanto de esa maldita pequeña bastarda?, gritó su hijo. Laura no escuchó nada más porque después de un largo silencio en el que le dio un vuelto el corazón, no hubo tiempo para escuchar nada más. Sus pies, de motu propio, habían comenzado a moverse carrera abajo y para cuando hubo llegado a las puertas del colegio se había erigido en sí misma en huérfana y ya no había más nombres. Muy bien. ¿Sí? ¿Sí? Sí. Entonces, seguimos con el segundo cuento y lo presento brevemente y empezamos. Es de Mirta Yáñez, de Cuba, se llama Quijote y los caníbales. Mirta Yáñez nació en la ciudad de Habana en 1947 y es profesora jubilada de la Universidad de La Habana y es novelista, poeta, ensayista y cuentista. Quijote y los caníbales de Mirta Yáñez es una historia profunda que describe lo que es llegar a la madurez. La protagonista cumple 40 años y recuerda su pasado. Sin embargo, no es simplemente su pasado sobre lo que ella reflexiona, sino que con una imaginativa intensidad también regresamos a la experiencia del pasado cubano. El panorama, los sonidos de la calle, otro bus, el autobús número 19.
Fusoja Baroni. My 40th birthday celebrations began shortly after midnight with the unmistakable sound of the tape recorder button. Very softly, so as to not wake up the children, Strawberry Fields Forever was playing. I listened as it filled the room, the sheets, and every nook and cranny of my entire being. This is my first gift, said Marcelo. Another familiar sound awakened me early that morning. Marcelo was working relentlessly on the car in a desperate attempt to get it to start. The window was open, and as I lay in bed, I could see him soiling the lily-white bathrobe with the dirty engine oil. Though disheartening, the image was not as bad as that of the children standing stiffly in the doorway, singing "Happy Birthday," or with a ridiculous air about them. "Get ready, everybody. We are going to take the bus," shouted Marcelo, as he whizzed past in the corridor. He stopped for a second and asked, "I'm taking the kids out. What are you going to do with the day all to yourself?" I racked my brain trying to find an answer. "Interview a tribe of cannibals, compose an ode and make the trip to Mars," I finally responded. Marcelo shook his head from side to side in disbelief and said, "Okay, but just be back early." When they left, I collected the cigarette butts that had piled up in the ashtray during the night, threw them in the waste basket, made the bed, and put on a pullover and a pair of jeans that looked like they had been around at least since World War I. I looked outside. There was barely any sunshine, and a few fluffy clouds floated by lazily, so I decided to take a special route. The entire line of the number 19 bus from start to finish, from the bus stop all the way to the terminus. All those years at university, the first love affair, visits to grandma on Queen Street, the film library, the marriage to Enriquito, the career, the job at the hospital, my old life spent getting on and off the number 19 bus. It was quite a long walk to the nearest station. I had done it many times before. After today, I had 22 fine lines around my eyes to accompany me. Crow's feet, to put it bluntly. I didn't have back then. A few extra pounds and some cavities topped it all off. What worried me, though, was the breathlessness. And so the first real question I asked myself while waiting for the bus was this: how much can one person change in a few short years? When Robin the cat died, I think I became aware of the exact day my youth ended. I had already started to worry about how to recognize early on the first day of one's old age. The bus had changed as well. It was now blue, freshly painted, and with shiny new fenders. It looked sturdy though, I will admit, that I preferred the others, those old pieces of junk with their broken windows and leads. They made a frightening sound that seemed to come from their very bowels and looked like they were going to fall apart at any given moment. The old number 19 from back when I was a teenager had something lifelike about them. Whenever I saw the front part coming onto Zapata Street, it would always make me think of some antediluvian animal cautiously sticking out its nose. Maybe they too had gone to rest in some secret usury after having shaken so vigorously through the streets of Colón.
Okay, muchas gracias a todos. Y aquí cerramos esta lectura maratónica. This is the end of the events of the Marathon reading this year for the 8th anniversary of the Marathon reading. Muchas gracias y nos vemos el próximo año. Gracias. Thank you very much. Please.